The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Vitruvian Man podcast, a podcast centered around self-mastery. I'm your host, Zach Shankin. Today, I'm joined by Alexandria Leora. Alexandria is a young mother, businesswoman, hustler, and incredible force for good. She is involved with the Irrational Optimism movement, which is taking the internet by storm right now, and has recently organized and carried out a massive food drive in East Palestine, Ohio, to affect those affected by the train crash and chemical release. Alexandria is a highly spiritual woman and interested in God, astrology, and is broadly focused on helping those in need by bringing love and light into the world. We will discuss all of that and more, as well as review my birth chart to see what the stars have to say about me. Alexandria, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. What a killer introduction. That was beautiful. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course. Yeah. I always like to see if I can put people in the best light that they can, because it always starts them off with like a smile, gives good energy, and I don't know, everybody deserves their shine. I don't think enough people get credit on the day-to-day, and then I think everybody has such an incredible short story to share. And so a part of this, like in inviting you on, is allowing you to share your story, which, I'm not even too familiar with yet. We just met recently online. And so I'm glad that our paths did cross, obviously through a bit of the irrational optimism movement that's kind of sweeping Twitter right now, which we can go into in a bit. But I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm super eager to give you the opportunity to share and see what there's about that. But I want to kind of kick things off. I typically am always interested in how people found themselves in the world of like what I can broadly categorize as like self-mastery, self-discovery, self-improvement, whatever you want to call it. But your path to becoming the woman that you are now, I want to hear a little bit about what was your upbringing like, and then your transition into, I guess, a really actualized person that really wants to like make a lot out of this life and herself. Was there a specific person that caused that transition, book, something transformative moment? Very open-ended, but a little bit of your story and intro there.
Yes. Okay. I'll kind of start with my upbringing because I feel like that's very important to where I am at now. So I was raised in a very strict household by a single dad for the most part. And I went to Catholic school for 10 years. So religion and spirituality is something that's always been very prominent in my life. And because of this, and because I kind of just got thrust into the environment of going to Catholic school when my family was not super religious to begin with, I was very rebellious. I spent my teen years just kind of messing around, partying all the time, being a little delinquent, doing things I definitely should not have been doing at like 15, 16 years old. And that kind of carried on until I was like 18. And that's whenever I got pregnant with my son. His dad and I were together for a little while. Things seemed good and it wasn't planned, but it was just kind of the flow of how things progressed. And I would say that is probably the point where things really started to change for me. As soon as I found out about my son, I really cleaned up my act. I got my shit together, started taking work more seriously, and just like wanted to set myself up to provide the best life for him. Things, of course, do not always go as planned. And I will keep the story about this short, but his dad just ended up not being a fantastic guy. Very shortly after I had my son, we split, and there were a period of a couple years where he did not see his son at all. So I was pretty much on my own raising him. My family is really helpful. They're around a lot. They say it takes a village to raise a kid, and it absolutely does. And I'm so incredibly grateful for them and everything that they do for me. But that kind of like sent me, whenever, that all happened, into like a little bit of a downward spiral. But it didn't last very long because whenever you're a parent, your main focus is on your kid always. No matter what you're doing, who you're with, they're just always in your mind. So there was a little short stint of that. And then I was just sitting with myself one day and I was like, I really, really need to just put myself together and build the absolute best life for my son that I can. So that's kind of whenever I made it into like the money Twitter scene and like the like online fitness space and just like that kind of corner of the internet. I spent a couple years lurking and just, reading posts and learning new ideas and just kind of exploring spirituality within myself. That's kind of when I really got into astrology as well. I had always been interested in it. Whenever I was a kid, I would get those like little teeny bot magazines and like read the corny horoscopes, and I thought they were the best. But then I really started studying, and I learned that there was so much more to it. And at first, it was very like an occult type practice. I didn't really have God in the forefront of my mind at all. I was more like, I want to be able to know things about people and predict the future and just like that kind of thing. Um, and I think that kind of held me back from really understanding a lot about astrology at the time. But around the same time as well, I found somebody on Twitter. He goes by Kenshu. And he talks a lot about born day fasting, which is an ancient Egyptian practice. And basically, the general idea is the ancient Egyptians believed that whenever you pass away and your soul moves on to the afterlife, there is a long journey to get to paradise. And the journey is hard, it's very difficult. And you need to have that reliance on yourself and the reliance on your creator to get you there. And that idea really resonated with me. And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm just going to try this and just see how it goes. Like, there's no harm in just like a fast once a week. I fast on Saturday. I still do it to this day. And that was, I think, the big kicker for me really getting my ass in gear. Very shortly after that, I found God again. I started, applying religious techniques to my astrological studies. I started becoming more active on Twitter and just kind of reaching out to people that I thought were interesting. There was no transactional ideas about it in my head. It was more so, these people are cool. I like their ideas. I want to be their friend. And that has just kind of snowballed since then. I actually ended up getting the job that I have right now from Twitter. I have a lot of really amazing friends. That's how I got involved with Irrational Optimist. And that is, yeah, just kind of how I got to the point where I am now.
Well, that was a unbelievably well structured answer, almost as if you had prepared it. But I will commend you for that. And there's a lot to touch on, and I definitely want to kind of break into some of that stuff. I definitely think that, I mean, overall, like a super impressive journey, and I cannot speak to that feeling of having a child, but having witnessed it in friends' lives, what my parents have shared with me, I think that clarity of focus, like you basically had no choice but to get your shit together, kind of like you said, right? Like there was somebody depending on you, and for better or for worse, that was exactly what you were called to do at that moment. Can you touch on, and this is an extremely personal question, so answer it how you see fit, but can you touch on the decision to keep the child, especially at such a young age? Was that even a question in your mind at the time? And was that something that you discussed?
Yeah. So up until probably like 2020, my politics were very far left. And I was pretty active in like doing things and just like supporting different movements that I thought were right, and helping people in my local community who were running for office who I just wanted to support. So at that time, that I was very much pro-choice. That was something that I really believed in. Um, and then whenever I found out that I was pregnant, I did have that thought. I was like, well, what am I gonna do? Like, I'm 18 years old. I just graduated high school. Like, I think I was working at like Spencer's at the time. Do you know what Spencer's is? That like, it's like Hot Topic, but like even more strange. Um, so I definitely thought about it a little bit, but whenever, and I don't know if this rings true for all women, but for me personally, whenever I knew that I like had a child inside of me, it was almost like everything about me mentally had changed. Like at that time, and even for a little bit after that, I still was very pro-choice. But I just could not fathom getting rid of my own child. You know, like I thought about it and I was like, I can feel like the ache in my heart of even having that thought. So it was something that crossed my mind, but it wasn't something that I really truly considered.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And obviously it's an entire world that I will refrain to touch on because it's not my experience at all. Not only like not having a partner to make that decision, but on top of that, like not experiencing that for myself. But I am like genuinely curious and appreciate your candidness because I don't know, it is a unbelievably layered and important decision to make. You know, I'm grateful for the fact that you chose to keep your son. Obviously, he is and will continue to be for the rest of his life. So I think that's a really beautiful and honorable thing. But I was curious, especially with like, yeah, the time we were raised in, the time that we're in now. I'm sure you had people telling you X, Y, and Z thing. Like even your parents who came from this Christian background, like I've seen in my instance, so I was also raised in like Christian upbringing, Christian education, like, and there were girls that, you know, would get pregnant very young. And then the second that happened for their daughter, the parents switch up and they say like, oh, like we're going to the clinic right now. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
really interesting to see how people's worldviews get tested in times like that. So I definitely was curious about like your mental perspective there, as well as how it kind of clashed and integrated with your worldview. So with the spirituality thing and like the path from, I guess, generic like crystal astrology girl to like kind of a fully integrated academic practice and like a deep understanding and something spiritual. I'm curious about that. I think we can move to that a little bit later. I do want to give you the time to talk about with everything going on in Ohio and everything. Is that kind of where you're based out of?
So I'm an hour north of Pittsburgh, so I am an hour east of East Palestine. So I'm in that like general Western PA area.
And are you typically working in like humanitarian type efforts, or did you just feel particularly called in this instance? And how did that kind of materialize?
This was something that I felt really called to do. It's actually kind of crazy. So I started, this is going to sound like it's off topic, but it all flows together, I promise. So last year, I started gardening for the first time. And this is something that people in my family have done for years. My great great grandfather, he was the first one to come over in our family from Switzerland. And I actually have a picture of him right over here. He's posing in his garden. He was in the local paper because he had the biggest garden in town. He was an awesome guy. Um, and so my grandma carried on that tradition. And very early last year, I was like, I think this is something that I want to do. And my idea in my head is I want to be able to grow my own food, not only for myself, but so that I can help feed other people and help get them high quality food, because everything that we are fed these days in the grocery stores is poison. It's garbage. It's absolutely terrible for you. So I just wanted to give people easier access to that. That was like my main idea. And I was like, once I'm good at this, like I can start cooking meals for like the homeless in downtown Pittsburgh, or just like people, you know, in my small town, and just kind of see where that goes. So I had this vision in my head already of just making meals for people, feeding them for free, just kind of offering them a space to like come eat and hang out within their own community. So whenever I found out about the train derailment in East Palestine, um, I was reading about it on Twitter, and I'm very like conspiracy oriented. I always kind of have been. So that was like kind of the general gist of the post that I was seeing. I was like, this is really crazy. I was like, and I know I'm close to Ohio. So it's like, I wonder like how close I am to this town, because I had never heard of East Palestine before. So I pulled it up on my map and I saw that I was 34 miles directly east. And I was like, oh, I was like, one, this is maybe bad because these chemicals are burning in the air and they're spreading and they're absolutely coming to my area. And two, I was like, I feel like I should do something about this. And at first, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I really wanted to get in touch with the people that were there in that area to kind of see what they needed. So they had a town hall. about a week and a half after the derailment, and my friend Sarah and I went out there. She was one of the girls who helped me whenever we cooked all the food. And we were basically just going to get answers. Like we wanted to talk to people, see what the people in the town thought, talk to all the local officials, see what they had to say, and just kind of go from there. And the town hall was interesting, but we very much got run in circles by a lot of politicians. And so there weren't really any real answers provided. Aside from the people in the town that we talked to, we met a lot of really cool people whenever we were out there. One of them, his name is Chris Wallace, and his wife, Jamie, and they are involved with River Valley organizing. They are really taking the charge in the community. They're doing a lot of the groundwork out there to get unbiased testing and help get people relocated and hold events for like the kids and the people in the community just to feel a sense of normalcy. So whenever we were leaving there, Sarah and I were talking and we were trying to figure out something that we could do. And I was like, you know what would be cool? I was like, because we don't have the funds to pay to relocate these people. You know, we don't know anybody who can come out to do this testing. I was like, wouldn't it be cool if we just cooked a bunch of food, found a space out there, took all of the food out there and just fed people, you know? Because whenever you go through something like that, like it was almost like a death of their past lives. And that was something that somebody had said to me. They're like, everything that I know is gone. Like everything is different now because of this train derailment. But like basic everyday tasks are not things that you want to think about, like cooking dinner and doing the dishes, doing your laundry. And, you know, like whenever somebody dies or has a new baby, like what is something that people do? They bring them meals so that they don't have to worry about cooking. So it's like, all right, this is what we're going to do. Sarah was on board. We've got one of our other friends, Bree, on board as well. And it was very, very last minute. The town hall was on a Wednesday. And I was like, we're going to do this on Sunday. This is my only day off. I work 6 days a week, and they were both off as well. So I was like, this is perfect. So on Saturday, the day before, I made a post on Twitter and just kind of explained what I wanted to do. And I was like, I'm putting up 500 of my own dollars. I have 2 friends who are going to help me. If anybody wants to donate so that I can feed more people, that would be amazing. And we ended up raising over $1,000 from everybody else to do this. So that's exactly what we did. I got up super early on Sunday. We met up at Sam's Club. We went and bought tons of food. We had cases of meat. I think there was like 60 pounds of ground beef and just everything that we needed. We took all of it out to my grandpa's house. He's got the biggest kitchen that I have access to, and it is by no means like a large kitchen. It's just larger than the one at my house. And we cooked for 4 hours straight. That was all the time we had. And we loaded up my car. It was absolutely packed to the brim full of food. And we took it out there. We were able to use a really nice space called Studio 25. Dawn and Diane, they own that space. They own a couple other local businesses in the town, and they were generous enough to not only let us use the space, but they set everything up for us. They helped us get everything put together. They went around before we got there, like telling people like, hey, these girls are coming. They have food, come eat. And we ended up feeding close to 200 people whenever we did that. We did a big drop off at the local police department. There were a couple people that I got in touch with in the town who were homebound or they just had things going on, so they couldn't make it out. So I did a round of deliveries as well. And it was a really fulfilling thing to be able to do. And it was cool to see the idea that I had last year manifest in that way. Because when I first thought about it, I really didn't know how I was going to execute. But then this came about and I had the idea to cook for them. And I was like, oh, this is why God put this idea in my head. This is exactly it right here. And as soon as I put those pieces together, I was like, I have to execute right now. There was no question about it. Like that was just what I had to do. But yeah, it was very fulfilling. I'm still doing some work with them out there. They've kind of slowed up on the events that they're doing because they're just working on testing and relocating right now. They are doing an event for the kids soon, just kind of like a field day type thing where they can go and play games, and they'll have like mental health professionals and like basketball, football coaches and stuff for them to go talk to. So we're going to set something up for that so that we can get some food out there for them as well whenever they have a date picked for that.
That's incredible. And I think you touched on a really important point, but I think in life broadly, there are these moments and opportunities that the preparation and groundwork has been laid over so much time, but it's on you to be responsive and take that fast action. So it's incredible that you were able to like, I feel like materialize and mobilize so effectively and quickly. That's really awesome. And really cool to see like the power of the internet, like rally behind it as well. Even in like such a small truncated period of time. And even in like, I mean, your followership, my followership were like relatively small. So it's pretty cool to see that even in that little reach, there's like still that human element. And I guess more broadly, touching on, I guess, that giving nature about yourself. I know you talked about being a little bit inspired to go more into like growing your own food and everything like that last year. But do you think that that's always been an aspect of your character, and also had it changed since becoming a mother? Because I feel like those are often hand in hand, like putting others first, being like a servant leader.
Absolutely. I always knew throughout my life that I wanted to help people. Like when I was a kid and people would ask me like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? I'd be like, I just want to help people. Like, I don't really know what I want to do. I just want to help people in some way. Um, and so I always had that in the back of my mind. And whenever I became a mother, it's not always immediate, but the maternal instinct is very real. It very much takes over your brain, that just like nurturing, like I want to take care of people, I want to do things for them, I want to help them. So that really like kickstarted me into figuring out more and more ways that I could do this. There's some things in my small town that I live in, just like community events and, you know, things for the kids that I volunteer for, which has always been really amazing. But yeah, being a mom definitely made me take that more seriously. And after everything in East Palestine, it really showed me that I do, in fact, have the ability to execute things like this. Until pretty recently, I've always kind of had that nagging thought in the back of my mind, and sometimes it still pops in. I'm a lot better at ignoring it now. But it's just like, you have all these crazy ideas. How are you ever going to do this? Like nobody's going to support you. Like you're insane for even thinking this. And then I just did it. I ignored all those thoughts and I just did what I knew I needed to do. And so now, that I'm confident in the fact that I can do these things, I definitely want to expand on them more. I'm not really entirely positive on how exactly I'm going to do that yet. I still really like the idea of with my garden, just like cooking really high quality homemade meals for people, passing them out to the homeless, because there are so many homeless people around here, and I know the homelessness is a big problem everywhere right now. Um, but yeah, I'm not too positive aside from that where I'm gonna go in that direction. But I know I get divine sparks of inspiration. I'm very impulsive, very intuitive, and so as those ideas come to me, I'm just gonna execute.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And I think um, being like tapped in and aligned with those synchronicities, like having the eyes and the ears, the eyes to see and the ears to hear, when you get those callings is so important. And it's really cool to, I don't know, have the clarity of the larger vision, right? Like the broad purpose is to help people, and that's good enough. Like there's so much pressure in the West and in the US to like make it young. You have to decide what you want to study for the rest of your life, which is going to be your career at 18. Then, you know, you have everybody flexing online, like these 22-year-old millionaires. And like, of course, like as an ambitious young man myself, an entrepreneur, like I have the similar goals and aspirations, but you know, playing that comparison game it's just it's a lose-lose, right? Like it's not going to change your
Mm-hmm.
reality. And I think that inner voice is so important to be able to like go to battle with and quiet. I don't know if you've read Outwitting the Devil, but like
Yes, I
yeah,
love that book.
unreal book. That's probably my most powerful one on that inner voice, that inner devil. But there's so many. I know Stephen Pressfield calls it like resistance. Aubrey Marcus calls it the anti-you, so it would be like the anti-Alexandria. Um, and it's like everybody battles it. Everybody has that inner bitch, that inner demon that's always kind of questioning, whispering in your ear, like, what if it doesn't work out? Are you sure you have it? Are you sure you should go in that direction? That's not safe. That's not smart. But, you know, everything that we want in life is on the other side of that voice. You just have to kind of like
Yes.
lean into it. And the louder, like Stephen Pressfield says, like the heavier that resistance is, the more you will need to go in that direction, because that's like where the right answers are.
Mm-hmm.
So touching on that, I guess, intuitive aspect, I think a lot of that comes with a deep understanding of self. Like your intuition is finely tuned when you have the ability to quietly listen to God speaking to and through you. So I'm curious, wind back the wheels of time, get to the, kind of tumultuous short-term period post discovering that you're going to be a mom, transitioning into being a young mother, and then realizing that, okay, I need to create stability for my son, but also I can't take care of him unless I take care of myself. So how did you kind of reaffirm and integrate upbringing in Christianity into spiritualism? And I want to hear a little bit more about like kind of the granularity of that path.
Oh, okay. That's kind of a loaded one. Let me think for a
Yeah,
second.
yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's a good one. That's a really good one. Um, I guess I'll start by saying that up until I was probably like 21-ish, I really had no idea who I was. And a lot of that stemmed from me being so rebellious as a kid. Because anything anybody told me, I did not want to listen to. I thought everybody was wrong. I had all the right answers, and that's just what it was. And I feel like a lot of people are like that as teenagers. That's just kind of like the territory. Um, but because of that, I would jump into things that really did not resonate with me at all. But somebody out there told me that's not the right idea. And I was like, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to show you that it's the right idea. So it took a lot of self-reflection and just kind of like being with myself and a lot of alone time to really figure out who I really am, what are my goals, what are things that I want to accomplish in this life, and how do I want to go about that. And even today, as I'm about to be 25 in like 2 weeks, I still sometimes am not fully positive, and I feel like that's something that a lot of people deal with. That you know who you are and you're confident in yourself, but sometimes, like we were just saying, that anti you that is just kind of always back there. But what led to me getting to a point where I was more confident with myself and knowing who I really am at my core, was a lot of shadow work is something that it's like a term that people might be familiar with. Um, a lot of really, really deep, intricate journaling, just like massive brain dumps. There was a period of a couple of days where I just sat on my computer and I typed out everything that had ever happened to me. And I just kind of like assessed those emotions and really kind of got to the root of like, okay, why did that happen? Why did I stay in this situation for so long? Why did I think this was a good idea or a bad idea, or whatever. So that was very helpful to me. And the born day fasting was also a big part of that as well, because the idea whenever you do it, like you can fast just regularly, and you just don't eat, and that is what it is. But whenever you're born day fasting, you have the intention of your mind of relying only on your creator to make it through that fast. And it's really crazy, because like I could fast any day of the week and not feel hungry, not think about food. My mental clarity will be on point, and I'll just go about my day and it'll be fine. But as soon as Saturday rolls around, for whatever, and not for whatever reason, but because it's such a spiritual thing, and because anytime you are doing something and moving towards the light, the devil will always try to pull you back to the darkness. I am so hungry. Everything smells so good. I'm just like, well, just one time won't hurt. Like just a little snack, whatever. Um, so it takes a lot of reliance on God and a lot of prayer as well to make it through that kind of mental battle. And that's something else that's really important whenever you're doing born day fasting. There's something called planetary hours, and that is basically every hour of the day is associated with a planet or a luminary, just like the days of the week are. Like, Sunday is the sun, Monday is the moon, etc. And so what you do whenever you're born day fasting, mine's on Saturday, so that's ruled by Saturn. So the intent is to pray during the planetary hours, because basically it's like gates open up in the sky of like energy that kind of just give you that like spiritual push to really truly talk to God in the way that you need. So through doing that, through finding that reliance with God and to really sitting down and talking to him, it really was like a back and forth conversation. Like I would run through things in my head, and it's almost like he would answer me, you know, and it sounds like your own voice in your head whenever he does, but there's just kind of like that different tone to it where you can tell like, all right, this is not me. This is the divine inspiration, and that's what I need to follow. So that's really what made me very sure of myself. And anytime that I'm not feeling sure of myself, I make it a point to sit down during the planetary hour of whatever day it is and just pray, and that always wipes it all away.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I mean, clearly like very well studied. So I do want to touch on that. Like, how did you come to, because I mean, we all come into this world with no knowledge, or at least we've forgotten it all, right? And uh, especially with our upbringings, like we're learning what is fed to us. So how did the self-education aspect, like even shadow work, like that's pretty, it's like a field and practice of its own, right? So were you self-educating? Did you seek counsel, therapy, etc.? And like, what were some of the resources that you were going to like educate yourself on even the words to use to speak to and with yourself?
It was pretty much entirely just self-education. I have always been I've had my Twitter since 2012, so that's something that I've always used Twitter. That's been a big part of my life. And a lot kind of like started from there, but I make it a point to not really rely too much on the information that I find on there. I like to, if I see something that piques my interest, I like to dig, do more research, and kind of really figure out what that person is actually trying to say, or like what is actually going on. So for a while, whenever I like first started on Twitter, I was very big into astro Twitter and just like spirituality side, and the esotericism and all of that. So they would talk about things like shadow work and going through a dark night of the soul, and things like that. Um, and I knew at the point in time whenever I started doing that like I was going through a dark night of the soul, and I did need to do that shadow work so that I could, instead of fight all of the demons that are in my head, I could learn their names and then ask them to leave. And that's exactly what it was. So I would hear about these things, and then I would really just kind of like do research, like on my computer, like different books that I have about how to really get more in depth with it. Um, but it wasn't totally that. A lot of it was very intuitive. Like the whole like brain dumping stuff. That wasn't something where like I read online, like, oh, like, write in a journal or go on your computer and just brain dump and put a bunch of things down that have happened to you and go through them. I just kind of like knew that was something that I was supposed to do. But yeah, it's just been pretty much entirely me. I personally am not a massive fan of therapy as it exists today. I think it can be helpful for some people. I don't discredit it entirely, but that's just not something that really fits me and what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, therapy is definitely an interesting one. It's something that I would love to explore more in the future. But I do think a huge kind of caveat and perspective to have with therapy is that just like every other career field, there is equally likely that there are shitty therapists and people who are just bad at the job, like people who were either educated by broken knowledge, broken systems, broken textbooks. I mean, like once you learn about the grander education system, obviously you're going to be pretty skeptical. So like traditional psychotherapy and all of that stuff is rooted in kind of these false claims or like massive assumptions about human psychology in general. So a lot of that's broken, but yeah, I think therapy, I mean, at its basic level, it just gives a audience and a context to like be introspective, which I think when you think about like a broad population, that's kind of what they need. I mean, like it sounds like from what you're describing, you're the person who had the wherewithal and the like, I guess the individual strength to do it yourself, but a ton of people aren't that way. I think like
Mm-hmm.
we are similar that way, and I I saw you put up on your story that, or on Twitter, that you were Aries, so potentially that has some sort of alignment. I'm newer to the astrology world because I came from both like the traditional Christian background, then I was educated in like a highly scientific technical university where like science is God, and that's kind of the framework we use. But I'm coming to this like space now where I'm starting to like learn more about esoterics and astrology. And what I find is really beautiful, and I'm sure you've consumed Robert Edward Grant, but somebody who just like points at the fact that even with etymological research, like the words that we use, it like everyone's telling the same story. They're just using different words, and oftentimes the words are wildly similar. So I do want to hear a little bit about how you went from and avoided kind of the occultism that can come with astrology and a lot of those practices, and like integrated it into like a faith-based approach.
Yeah, so there was a period of a couple of years where it was a very occult type practice. And it wasn't just that I was like using astrology that way. I was using tarot cards. I was trying to read those. I would use crystals. There was a while where I was into using Ouija boards with my friends. And that's very like dark demonic stuff. And I knew that at the time. But I was just so intrigued by the other side of this world that we can't see with our physical eyes, and that was an outlet for me to kind of explore that, or so I thought. So I was like, oh yeah, this sounds like a good idea. Like we would go out to graveyards, we would use the Ouija boards, and some very, very spooky things happened. There is this is going to sound so schizo, but there is a demon that is associated with the Ouija boards. Most typically goes by Zaza, but there are some other names that they go by as well. And whenever you're messing with these Ouija boards and you don't know what you're doing, which like 99% of people who do this don't know what they're doing, that demon or dark entity will come through and kind of be the one controlling the board and what it's telling you, and everything like that. So that ended up happening. Me and two of my friends, we were at their house the night that it first came through. And the board just started like going crazy from like Z to A, Z to A, Z to A. And a lot of people, when they think about using Ouija boards, are like, oh, like you guys are moving that, like it's not really doing it on its own. But whenever you use it and it actually does move on its own, and you can tell that it's not anybody else who's with you who's pushing it, it's very scary. And that entity kind of followed me for a long time. There weren't any like poltergeist type activities that happened, but it was just a very dark fog that just consumed my life. I was very depressed. I was very anxious. I was a massive introvert, and really just did not have any like sense of self-worth at all. And as I dove into astrology and tarot reading more, that kind of stayed with me. The like cloud of darkness. And so whenever I started the Born Day fasting and I started seeing more and more of the light, I realized that the way I was approaching things was incorrect. So there was a while where I stopped reading tarot. I still have a lot of my crystals, but I don't use them in the same type of way that I did before. And I pretty much entirely halted my astrological studies, because I was like, I need to get right with God before I do anything else. And so I took that time to really do that and form a relationship with him, and just get to a point where I felt secure in that relationship. And then I was like, okay, now like maybe I can dip my toes in these waters again. And there was something that I tweeted a little while ago, and it was, if astrology is blasphemous, then why did God put the stars and the planets in the sky like that? Why did Abraham write ancient astrological texts? Why are different pieces of astrology and crystals mentioned in the Bible? Because if you actually go through and you read the Bible, you know, they talk about, you know, a lot of different crystals and using incense and very, very specific colors and things like that. And really, whenever you think about it, you know, God made all of this, and he did not make all of this on accident, you know. And a lot of people, when they think of astrology, they think of, oh, it's you look at my chart and you can read my personality and tell the future and whatever. And you can in a way, but there's so much more to it than that. It's really just especially when it comes to natal astrology, which is just like the astrology of an individual in their birth chart. It's really telling the story of your life. And not everything in your chart will always make sense whenever you first read it and whenever you're young, because you haven't been through all of life's events yet. So different parts of your chart haven't been activated. And that's kind of what happens as you move through your life. So whenever I really picked up the astrology studies again, I would always make it a point to have my astrology textbooks and my Bible side by side. And if there was ever something that I was really like digging into in astrology that I was kind of feeling like wishy-washy about, I would and this is so cool how this happens. I will just open my Bible to a random page, and I still do this a lot just to see. And whatever I open it to, is it always resonates with what I'm thinking about or like what I'm trying to find, and not in a way where I read it and I spin it to fit the situation, but it just really genuinely fits, you know, what I'm trying to do. And so yeah, that's just, sorry, I'm trying to think of a good way to end the question.
No, you're good. I
And
have
wrap
a
that
lot to
up.
touch on, so it's good that you're taking a natural pause. But yeah, no, that's really incredible. And I do want to briefly pause, break the fourth wall, speak to the listeners here and say, like, look, if you are a skeptic of all this stuff, it sounds like very schizo, very out there, very woo-woo. I ask you just to sit with an open mind and open ears and just listen to it for what it is, because even if you're presented with it, it seems like crazy, just log it. There's a very real chance that along your journey down the line, you'll start to remember this stuff and you'll start to see things and hear things that are in alignment. And like what is broadly considered synchronicity, and like the truth will come to you when you're ready to hear it, but just kind of listen for what it's worth. I think that I was obviously very skeptical about the spiritual space for a long time. First, you're raised in Christianity and they're like, oh, that's a cult. Anything that's not, exactly how we button up our shirts and go to Sunday church. Like that's, if it's not us, it's them. So it's like very antagonistic. And you touched on it like really well with that, like the tweet you were saying, like, if astrology is a cult, why did God make it this way? And I look even more broadly at all of it, having gone heavily into the science and the database, like, and I think it's awesome that we're learning about this stuff. I think Dr. Joe Dispenza is a really good at bringing like all of these super ancient esoteric principles, and he just says it with the science words. So everyone's like, oh, yes, Mr. Dispenza. Thank you, Dr. Dispenza. Like, but if a yogi were to show up and be like floating on their little mat and say the same thing, but just without, neurotransmitters and pineal gland, but they were talking about the third eye, people would be very skeptical. So like science is the language of our time. It's the words we're choosing to use, but there are underlying truths with like a capital T. So I do want to ask though, moving, I guess you kind of explained it, like guess and check against the Bible. As someone who is exploring, like maybe someone listening in the audience or even me, when I see something that's interesting, I go to study it. How do I discern most effectively what is, I guess, a cult and what is more integrative, or is it more about how you bring it into your personal practice or like understanding?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think it's a little bit of both. It is very dependent on how you bring it into your own self and your own space. Because you could really make a cult following out of anything. And I feel like we see it a lot on our side of Twitter, where they'll rally behind certain larger accounts to such a high degree, and it's like they don't even really have any thought behind why they're doing it. They're just kind of doing it. They're there for the ride, and that is what it is. But I think a part of it as well. So my astrologer, he goes by Paul Publisher on Twitter. He's taking a little hiatus right now, but he is absolutely fantastic. He puts out newsletters for the new and the full moons. And he talks about this thing, how we're in the patchwork age right now. And I know I'm not going to do it justice in how I explain it at all. But it's basically just how people in our time right now are really breaking into their own almost cult-like groups where like you have the people, and like I'll use Twitter as an example because I feel like people like listening will be most familiar with that. But like you have the people who are like in fitness Twitter or money Twitter, or like conspiracy theory Twitter and stuff like that. And that's their identity. That's what they do. They don't really explore a lot outside of that. Or if they do, they're skeptical about it. So what he talks about with the patchwork age is just how people are filing more and more and more into those specific groups and just kind of following them in a way that is potentially unhealthy. And I think it's okay to explore these things and be part of these things, but you have to keep a level head about it. You know, you can't. I am a firm believer in the fact that you cannot make one sole thing your identity. You can have one thing that's like your guiding light and that's what drives you. But whenever you fall into the trap of only having that one thing, it kind of leaves you blind to everything else that is out there. So yeah, just making sure you keep a level head whenever you go into these things. And there's a lot of the internet is so difficult now because there's so much misinformation out there about everything. So it's very difficult to get to like the real truth and the bottom of things that you might be trying to get to the bottom of, especially when it comes to spirituality and stuff like that. Because everybody has their own unique perspective on it and different ways that they practice and just different things that they believe. But my recommendation for that is definitely to find some trusted sources of the information that you are seeking out. And do not put these trusted sources that you find on a pedestal, because that's whenever you fall into the trap of the cult-like following. But if you view these people as regular people, which they are, then it's a lot easier to kind of read and assess their ideas and kind of be able to discern like, okay, yes, this fits me, this does not, I believe this, I want to learn more about this because I think it's a good idea and I think it resonates with my life.
Yeah, I think that's a really balanced approach. And it's also yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We're kind of up against evolutionary psychology in that sense. Like we are human, our human meat vehicle is very tribal. Like we want to be accepted by these groups of people. So, and especially I think when we're in like a wildly interconnected age, but extremely isolated as well. So people are just lonely. They're craving for communities to be a part of. So the internet can be an amazing place for that. When you see a movement like Irrational Optimism, where it's just generically like, hey, let's be optimistic and smile about this like thing we're calling life. Or more occult or like maybe negatively focused, and it can be whatever it is, like we can go red versus blue. Like they're just ways to bifurcate and capitalize on that tribal nature. So we're up against a little bit of that, even with the way that we start to compartmentalize what we believe in our heads. So I think that's a really balanced approach. And then I do want to ask, you were saying like guess and check with the Bible. Do you look at first of all, the God of the Christian Bible, and then two, the Christian Bible itself as the infallible words of God? Like, is that your source material? And do you believe solely in the God that the Bible describes?
I want to say yes and no. Because
not a very Christian Bible answer.
I know. It fits me. It really does. But whenever I think of just like all of the stories that are told in the Bible and the way that God is described in the Bible, I don't think that those things are wrong. I think a lot of them are accurate. I think a lot of them are true. A lot of them have, genuinely happened in the past. But on the other hand, whenever I think about God and just like the creator of all of this, it's a very, I want to say it's a very like personalized idea in my head, and something that Kenshu talks about on Twitter, the one who I learned about born day fasting from. He said one time that every idea that you have of the creator is just another piece of his creation. We will never be able to fully conceptualize exactly who he is and what he can do because we just do not have that, level in our brain. Like we are humans. That's just not how we are. It's absolutely impossible. So while I do agree and believe in the Bible in and of itself, all the stories that they're telling, everything that's said is just another piece of creation. It's not necessarily like God himself, and there are a lot of people who say things about the Bible, about how different stories are plagiarized, like, from the Epic of Gilgamesh, and different stories about how, like, Jesus's birth and his resurrection, and how that very, very closely correlates to the precession of the sun, during the winter solstice and things like that. And I think those ideas are valid. But I don't believe that, the stories are plagiarized. I think they're genuine. But it is important to recognize that through the course of history and through all different types of religion, no matter what it is, everybody kind of has the same general idea. The details might be different, but the general ideas are the same.
Yeah, I think you touched on a space that I'm definitely entering now, which is this. A lot of people say there's a lot of ways to the top of the mountain, and I almost imagine all of humanity throughout history, time, and geography staring at the same mountain, and because we were so disparate, I mean, I guess we were Pangea at one point, but like we were all
Pangea.
we were all kind of spread across the world at these different places, separated by tribe, race, name of country, whatever. And we've all kind of we see the mountain and we see exactly what it is. We describe it in explicit detail. This is our creator. We saw this prophet. They're our holy person. And they're all telling the same story because they're all looking at the same mountain, but like it looks wildly different. This side might have only stone. This might have sand. This might have trees, metaphorically speaking. And so, yeah, I really like that I'm coming to the place where God, divine source, breathed truth into all of these different like holy texts, religions, etc. And it's just about divorcing yourself from wanting to be so tribal, wanting to be like, I have the right answer, like this one's right and yours is wrong, because that's so egoic in general. So do you think that the individual is divine, like as far as like reality creation, intuition, like is that the voice of God in each of us?
I do. I think there's a piece of God in everybody. No matter who they are, no matter what they do, even the people who are the worst of the worst, the people who are the absolute best, there is God in everybody. I do think intuition can be the voice of God. I don't think it's always that. But it definitely is to some degree and can be sometimes.
Yeah. And I think also the argument could be made that when it is not, it's not actually your intuition, right? It's just your brain overwriting and you mishear. I put out a tweet a while ago. For my small following, it was well received, but it was like your intuition is literally never wrong. You either mishear it or choose to misinterpret it or something to the effect of that. I'm misplagiarizing my own words, but the point is that like, yeah, like it is the voice of God, that like true intuition, that feeling, that somehow right, that like vibe that you pick up on the first time you meet somebody, but immediately you're like, no, like they're blah blah blah, and then you find out months later that, oh my God, they were. Those are the types of things that I think is source breathed in. And even circling back to like the beginning of our conversation, your calling to be prepared to serve a year ago just by some weird interest, right? This like niche, like, oh, I want to call back to my family history. I want to explore this new hobby. That was God preparing you for being able to help those people now, which I think is really beautiful. And, to the skeptic, it's like, you can call it coincidence, but I think if you live the rest of your life calling the amazing and beautiful things in your life coincidence, you're missing out on a lot of beautiful opportunities, and certainly kind of limiting your field of experience. But you only get one life, and I'm busy like trying to live mine to the most. So I'm not here to like proselytize. I love picking your brain about it. So I do want to kind of get into, we've kind of not really well defined our terms or conditions with astrology in general. So I want to give you the opportunity to say like, I'm a dummy, so the person's listening is a dummy. I don't know what astrology is other than it relates to the stars and the planets. What is your kind of maybe 5-minute crash course without overloading? And then we can go into reading my chart and what that means for me and a person, me as the proxy.
Yes. Okay. Um, so this is something that I have been working on through my astrological studies, because I have this problem where whenever I start to explain things to people, I will get a little bit too technical, and I'll always explain what the terms mean. Like I'll go really in depth, but it's just so much information blasted at you at one time. So I'll try to keep it as simplistic as possible. But basically, like I said a little bit ago, astrology is the story of your life, especially whenever it comes to natal astrology. So that's whenever you're looking at somebody's individual birth chart. It's not 100% necessary, but very important to know the time that you were born whenever you're doing astrological readings, because that determines a lot about how the planets in your chart sit. So there are a couple different aspects that we look at whenever we study astrology. So there are signs, planets, houses, and aspects. So the signs are like they're the what, the planets are the who, and the houses are the where. And then the aspects kind of tell you about how those different placements interact with each other and how that energy manifests within your chart. And so you can take somebody's birth chart and just it's that snapshot of that exact moment that they were born, and you can kind of tell things about them. And I personally don't like to do really deep personality readings, because everybody's chart manifests differently. You could have two twins who are born 3 minutes apart, so their charts are almost nearly identical, but because they are different people, their charts will manifest differently. So there are some things you can tell personality wise, but that's not my favorite approach. I do think it is cool for looking at different life events that may occur. There's a lot of things you can look into with astrology. You can look into relationships or your career, or like potential children that you may have, partners that you may be with, how you experience spirituality and religion, how you assess yourself, things like that. Something else that you can do whenever you're looking at somebody's natal chart is you can look at transits. So what the transits are is you have somebody's natal chart in front of you, and then overlaid on top of it is where the planets are in the sky currently, or at whatever point in time you choose. And that determines a lot about how the planets in your chart are activated to tell that story of your life. Because as you know, the planets do their thing and they move around in the sky, they come close to certain planets in your chart, or they're directly opposite of them, and that kind of gives them a different energy to work off of. That's something that I really like to do whenever I'm looking at natal astrology. There are other branches of astrology as well, which I also think are really interesting. There is mundane astrology, so that is using astrology to predict and look at in the past patterns of big world events. And whenever astrology was first not founded, that's not the word that I want to use, but whenever it was first, like, you know, recorded and starting to be practiced, that was the main focus of what they were doing, because it was really like the elite class who had astrologers and they used astrology. So they would use it to, you know, determine the best days to go to battle, or, you know, there's an eclipse coming, like our king might die, and things like that. And to spin off of that a little bit, there's also electional astrology. So that's whenever you look into the future of charts, and you determine the most auspicious day to begin a new venture. And there's a lot that goes into doing the electional astrology. It's very difficult to do, because you're never going to have the perfect lineup of planets in the sky for exactly what you're trying to do. You can get it as best as you can, but you've got to have a really long time frame open where you can kind of assess where the planets are and fit it to what you're trying to do. because it's not just people that have birth charts. Everything has a birth chart, you know, like the day you made a Twitter, there's a chart for that. The day you launch your podcast, there's a chart for that. The day you met some girl, there's a chart for that. And you can use all of those to kind of assess the energy of whatever it is that particular thing is that you're looking at. So that's kind of like a basic overview of like the different ways that you can use astrology. I won't delve too much into really like breaking down like what every sign and what every planet means. I will a little bit as I read your chart, but that's just like a word vomit of information that is a lot to go through.
No,
but that is
good.
something that I'm going to be exploring more on my Twitter and on my Substack. I'm going to get more into that. That way people who really want to learn have an outlet to do that.
Well, thank you for that. I've definitely immediately already learned some, and I have a lot of stuff that I would love to like dive into, but I want to keep this somewhat constrained. Also, hard pause for the skeptics. Words for natal astrology in science jargon: epigenetics, genetics, environmental factors, stimuli, events, trauma. These are the things that affect your life in the like scientific ways that we're describing. And that is the story of your life. Astrology is telling many of the same stories, just using different words. So rein your skepticism in, stop fuming behind the headphones, and just listen with an eager ear. I'm sending this back to like a previous younger version of me that like would have turned this podcast off, 10 times over. But I think it's like really, really valuable. And it's also like I look at myself at this like just I'm a strange character. I've always been at like the jack of all trades intersection of information. Like I had a hard time deciding whether I wanted to go to college with like hard engineering and hard skills or like writing and history and philosophy, because they both fascinated me equally. And so I've just always been like a strangely shaped peg with no hole to go to. But I'm trying to use that as a way to like focus really cool information from a lot of different places and like distill it down. So to my highly scientific, I've been there. Allow me to be like some sort of a midpoint translator, maybe the fulcrum of this strange balance beam we're on. But back to you and back to my chart, I suppose. Let's get in a little bit to that, and we can kind of touch on, because there's I think like I only have predominantly a very high level understanding of like the signs. So, but from there, like the tertiary levels deeper, I'm more curious about.
Okay, so I took some notes, so I'm gonna touch
Awesome.
on the things in your chart that really stood out to me the most. And like I told you whenever we first started, I kind of made it a point to not really dive too deeply into who you are. I really wanted to listen to episodes of your podcast, but I was like, no, that's gonna give things away. So I just kind of want to see like what resonates and what doesn't.
Also, before we
Um,
begin,
oh
what
yes.
exactly is like a chart, and how does one create, view, and like establish it and then begin to read from it?
Okay, so the chart, whenever you're looking at like your birth chart, your natal chart, that is the way the planets were sitting the exact moment that you were born. There are a lot of online resources that you can use to cast a chart. One that I really like a lot, it's an app, it's called Astrofuture. It's nice because it lays the chart out for you in a professional manner, but it gives you the option to like click on certain planets and it'll give you little blurbs about like what that means. And the way it explains things is very simplistic in a way that anybody can understand. There's more advanced websites too. Astro Cafe is really nice. AstroSeek, Astrofire as well. Those are all really good. If another app that is also good that goes a little more in depth and is a little bit more technical and intricate is called Time Passages. So those are some good resources if you want to take a look at your own chart and you want to really dive deep into your planets, your placements, your aspects. They can really help you a lot with that.
Cool. That's a good answer. Good resources that I will both personally check out and recommend everyone listening do your own little research as well.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, all right, let's get into it. So one of the first things that I noticed, but actually I'm going to just kind of tell some of your major placements. That way we kind of know what we're working with here. So you are, let me pull this up here. you are an Aries sun, Gemini moon, Aries Mercury, Gemini Venus, Scorpio Mars, and you have a Cancer rising. So these are what we call in astrology personal placements. So they are the placements that you have that can tell more about who you are as a person, if that's kind of, the route that you're taking whenever you look at astrology. Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are generational planets. Because they move a lot slower, they do still have an effect on you, but it is more so just like a generalized for like the generation that you're in. It can tell a lot about that. So one of the first things that stuck out to me whenever I was looking at your chart is the fact that your moon and Venus are in Gemini. So your moon is and the moon and Venus are both very feminine planets. The moon kind of like rules your emotions and your feelings, and Venus is all about love, how you give love, how you receive it, your relationships. They are in Gemini. Gemini is a very intellectual sign. Gemini is kind of known as like the chatterbox of the zodiac. And they sit in the 12th house. The 12th house is like the house of hidden things. It rules the subconscious, it rules the astral plane, very, very esoteric, very spiritual. So that on its own kind of alludes to a very private person, especially like about yourself and people that are close to you. But I thought it was interesting whenever I saw that. I'm like, that's cool that he has a podcast, because this specific thing right here kind of is indicative of somebody who wouldn't want to do something like that. But whenever you have placements that are like that, there's a thing called remediation in astrology, where there are certain things you can do to kind of counterbalance that energy and bring out a more powerful force within yourself. So I think the podcast is a very, very powerful thing for you, because it can kind of help you bring out those suppressed feelings and emotions and put them, to the surface. Your moon is sextile your Mercury. So your Mercury is how you communicate. Sextile is a term for an aspect that the planets make. There are positive aspects and negative aspects, and that's very general how I'm saying positive and negative. There's a lot more nuance to it. But sextile is a more positive aspect. So when there's positive aspects, the planets, their energies, they work well together. And when there's negative aspects, like an opposition or a square, they kind of like picture them like the two planets and signs like going head to head and just kind of like battling it out. But the moon sextile Mercury is kind of indicative of the fact that you are a good communicator, and that has been made evident already to me, that you're very good at articulating your ideas and just kind of putting them out there. Also indicative of you working with the public, which also goes hand in hand with the podcast, that you talk to a lot of different people, you bring a lot of different ideas, and you put them together in one space, like you were just saying, like you're a peg without a hole to go into, so you're trying to just like do all of that. The Gemini moon in and of itself says a lot about your mental clarity, and just the fact that you have a very active mind. I imagine that pretty often you have a lot of thoughts racing through your brain, and maybe a little too many for you to keep up with sometimes. And then what else do we have here? So your Mars is in Scorpio. Your Mars is really it's about like your determination and your drive and how you show up in the world. And Scorpio is a pretty, I don't want to say a dark sign, but it kind of is in a way. But like when people talk about Scorpios, they're like, oh, like mysterious and just kind of like hidden away. But that a placement in itself, Mars is very, very happy whenever it's in Scorpio. There are each planet has signs where it's happy in, and whenever it's not happy in. So the fact that you have that is just like indicative of like a strong and intense personality. You might be a person who is very proud. I imagine you may be kind of stubborn. That's kind of a piece of that. You're very headstrong, and you just kind of know what you want to do, and your way is the way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm very much that way myself, where it's, if it's my idea, it's a good idea, and that is what it is. So your sun and your Jupiter, your sun is basically like the essence of yourself. And Jupiter is the planet of abundance and expansion. So both of those planets you have in Aries, and they are in the 10th house of your career. So kind of tying back to the, you're very headstrong and very, you kind of know what you're doing. This maybe leads you to be a little bit impulsive sometimes. But being in the 10th house of your career, you can find great abundance by doing things that are unique to you. If you rely on your impulsive ideas and your gut feelings and you execute quickly, Jupiter has that ability to bless your endeavors and anything that you're trying to do. This also gives you a very strong first impression whenever you meet people, which I found myself whenever you reached out in DMs, and I was just like scrolling through your profile. And even when we first hopped on here, I was like, oh, like this dude is a whole person, like I can very much see that. And it's also indicative of good leadership qualities. You're probably a very compassionate. I feel like I get that vibe from you as we're here talking. But you're recognized by other people for this, for being able to take charge and just kind of like lead the pack sometimes when you need to, but also having that empathy for other people to do it in the right way, and to not be like a dictator type leader, but to just be a genuinely good leader. This is also like this placement right here, specifically the Jupiter in the 10th house is an aspect of fame. And not everybody who has the fame aspects ends up becoming like super mega famous, like, whenever we think of celebrities. But when your podcast really, really, really pops off, that might be, that might be, yes. So another one, your moon is trine Neptune. So trine is another one of the positive aspects. Neptune is a very dreamy planet. When I think of Neptune, I think of that state whenever you're like laying down in bed and you're trying to go to sleep, and it's that like half awake, half asleep. You're still kind of conscious in your mind, but like you're fading away.
Yeah.
That's what I think of whenever I think of Neptune. But your moon and Neptune working together really allows you to see the big picture of things, and to act on that big picture, and to try to take different ideas and really put them together and bring them into one like solid source. There was a quote. So whenever I read astrology charts, I don't just look at it and go off the top of my brain. I'm not like mega professional. I'm not an expert by any means. So I have books that I consult a lot. And there was one quote that I saw in there that I really, really liked about this aspect is if there's a nail, I'll bring the hammer. I thought that one was pretty good. Yeah. And then the last one that I have in here is so your Mars, like I said, that's like your determination and your drive and how you show up in the world, is square. That's one of the difficult aspects, Saturn. And Saturn is basically, think of Saturn as like the dad in the sky. It really rules like discipline and just motivation, and Saturn can bring a lot of blockages to your life, but not without purpose. Whenever Saturn brings blockages, it's always something that will be beneficial for you to accurately assess and work through. It's just kind of like those hurdles that you go through in life, where to get to the next level, you need to step over them. So your Mars is square your Saturn. So advancement in your life will really require you to put your head down at times and be very, very disciplined, just very kind of like go monk mode for a little bit. I don't really think the whole go ghost for 6 months and come back a new person is like always a good idea. But even just for a short span of time, you think of a project, you have a divine spark of inspiration. You're like, oh, this is something that I really want to do. So you kind of just like fade into the background for a little bit while you really work on that and hone in on exactly how you're going to do it and all of the details of it. But Saturn is really about like reaping the rewards of your hard work. This aspect can kind of lead to frustration because things may not always come super easily to you. It may take a lot of that discipline and determination to really get to where you want to be. But whenever you finally push through that brick wall of that blockage that you're facing, it's very, very rewarding. So yeah, those were the major things that I saw whenever I was looking at your chart. I hope some of that resonates.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously it was all relatively complimentary, so of course I'm inclined to take all of it and be grateful. But I mean, I know myself. I think I'm a pretty. I try my best, and it is a repeated practice and something I'm trying to be. I always try to be disciplined about, but like always introspective, always thinking about why I'm thinking the things I am, why I'm doing the things I am. Is it serving what I want out of life? Why do I want those things? It's like also very integrated with like a lot of the work I have the guys in my program do. So a lot of it, I think, as objectively as I can in this moment, I think does resonate in a really, really cool way. So it's cool to hear. I guess to play devil's advocate, how do you, when reading stuff like that, and is there a place for, is there anything on there that you saw maybe we can talk about antagonistic or negative things that in ways it could manifest? Because I think a huge criticism, at least that I've had in the past, and I know people talk about in astrology, is like, oh, they're just general compliments that are like huge broad personality traits. So like you hear it and you're like, OMG, it's so me. But it really isn't too specific. And trust me, like I wish we had a third party that has been like watching me both my entire life, but especially in the last like 8 months to really weigh in, because a lot of that stuff like really did hit. Especially with like the kind of overcoming obstacles, putting your head down. Like I've been, starting my business to the point where like I was building it in parallel with my job, and then got to quit in the new year. So like it's been like 8 or 9 months of like really putting my head down, like not being social, dialing back dating, like taking a time to be pretty much in my own and be focused on output and growing the business. So that specifically was one that stuck out, but a lot of it for sure. So what are some things that my chart might say are not so great about me?
Okay. This is so let me preface this by saying that whenever I think about astrology in general, not even just specifically somebody's birth chart, I don't like to look at things as like a good versus bad. And even in life in general, I don't like to take that approach because I believe that there is good in everything and there is bad in everything. It's how you take those things and how you work with them that really determines how that's going to be. Um, but the first one that I said about your moon and your Venus being in Gemini in the 12th house, typically in astrology, people will tell you that that is a very negative placement, a very tough placement to deal with. And any planet that falls in the 12th house or the 8th house, the 8th house is very similar to the 12th. It rules the occult, spiritual practice and study, death, things like that. Any planets that fall in those houses are usually difficult to work with because
how many houses did you say that there are?
There are 12.
Okay.
That go along with all of the 12 signs in the zodiac. There are different ways to practice the house systems. That's what they call them. There's a handful of different ones, but I personally like whole sign houses. So that's whenever the houses line up exactly with the signs. So that way it's more of a flow whenever you're reading it. But the other house systems do work pretty well. I don't discredit them at all. But yeah, that's a placement that can be very, very difficult to deal with, especially whenever you are younger and you don't really know who you are. You don't really know how to feel your emotions and how to process them, because whenever you're a kid, you're feeling all of these things for the very first time. Like everything bad that happens to you feels like the end of the world because you've never hit that baseline of pain yet. So as you progress through your life and you hit those baselines of pain, it's like, oh, it's really not that bad. But like being younger, that can definitely manifest in a negative way. Venus being there as well, that also can kind of allude to I don't want to say necessarily difficulty in relationships and like, like finding them or like sticking with them. But just in really showing up as your full self in relationships and really like letting other people have um pieces of you. And this isn't even 100% about like romantic relationships. When people think about Venus a lot, that's mostly what they think of is romance and love. And that is a lot of it, but it's also got a lot to do with like your familial relationships and like your business partnerships and your friends. So if you don't really know that about yourself, that like you may keep things repressed, you may kind of like be stuck in your head sometimes, then that can lead you to hold a lot of yourself back in these relationships, and kind of like have one foot in and one foot out of the door, which can make it difficult to progress in your life, because you have a lot of aspects in here that are very telling of working with people and just being like, with community and, having, a large network. So if you don't know that about yourself, then it could make things more difficult for you. But from what I've gathered, it seems like, you harness that energy pretty well, and you don't really let it hold you back.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think it's something that I work on for sure. And I always, it's really fascinating. I think I said something earlier, but something so powerful about all of this learning, and whether it's astrological or even like reading about therapy or like psychological stuff, evolutionary psychology, it gives you like, I think of it like words are so powerful. It's something that I'm extremely passionate about, like writing, communicating, speaking. Like the words that we use literally are creating the reality around us. And so I think healing and understanding about ourselves is arming ourselves with the right words to speak to ourselves and speak about ourselves to other people. And I always try to be hyper reflective and introspective, especially in those transitory periods when you're leaving, especially maybe like a romantic relationship where that emotion is high. And so you're very tapped into, deeper spiritual levels of yourself. And yeah, I mean, like, I don't think that I've had in my previous relationships, I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, but like I haven't personally like integrating it into what you're hearing. So like to quiet the skeptics, I think like I haven't had a successful into a marriage long-term relationship. So clearly what I've done in the past has not 100% worked. And when I like really take ownership of everything, knowing that like reality is a mirror and all of that stuff, I've always been like on paper exactly what was necessary for my partners. Like I checked the boxes. I'm an extremely high achiever. Like I did the things, set the date, gave the gifts, like all that stuff. I was always there. But then where like a huge thing I'm coming to be reflective on is like, where was that coming from? And it was a lot of it was a lack of a sense of like, I need to achieve to be worthy of love. I need to prove to you how much you should love me. Like I am the perfect boyfriend. Why won't you give back? So it kind of like manifests in attachment styles, what people would classify as like an anxious attachment style.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of that's very integrated into what you're kind of describing, where it's not that I was like having commitment issues, but maintaining a commitment and showing up as a true authentic self that loves the self, and like I'm like kind of entirely grounded in myself, is something that I'm still trying to like integrate now. So I think it's all good. It's just data points. It's just more words to use to describe and characterize my experience here. So I'm grateful for it. I think it's super helpful. And I think this stuff's super fascinating. I think there's something very romantic and intoxicating about like esoterics in general and astrology, like, because I think it speaks to something that is greater than us. I mean, we gaze upon the stars and like immediately we feel the gravity and uh enormity of the world. We feel so small
Mm-hmm.
but somehow so interconnected. So there's something like deeply spiritual about the stars, and then thinking that we're somehow part of that story is really, really cool. So I like it a lot, and I'm sure that some of the things that I've described are reasons why you find yourself attracted towards it. So I appreciate your wisdom and knowledge. I don't want to I might have to start you as a consulting service and have you be my astrologer to learn more.
Yes, yes, that would be awesome. That's one of my more longer term goals. So I've been working through a Hellenistic astrology course that Chris Brennan, he's a amazing astrologer. He's absolutely fantastic. But he put it out a couple of years ago. And it is so in depth. My textbook is massive. The lectures are like 6 hours long. It's a lot of information, and it's very technical, and it dives very deep. But that's something that I want to get closer to completing before I really put myself out there for like doing regular readings and stuff like that. But that is something that I do like for my friends, if they're like, I'll get texts all the time, like, what's happening with the moon? Why do I feel this way? Like stuff like that. Or even like more, serious things like, hey, I'm thinking about like launching this new business. Can you kind of like look at what's happening in the sky and like let me know how that's going? So that's definitely something that I would love to do for you. And any time that you would need it. It's a lot of really good practice for me, and it really helps me hone in on my skills.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I will. Don't make this offer in vain, because I will follow up. I know a lot of people online, at least I've experienced, they'll be like, yeah, man, like definitely hit my DMs whenever you need anything. And it's like a very transient, like kind of like offer where it's just the formal thing to do. But I'm a man who follows through. So I definitely will be
Yes, that's good.
hitting you back for sure for more detail. But I mean, this has been excellent. I definitely want to end by giving you, I know you've recently opened a Substack, so I want to let the people know what you're working on, what you're super excited about currently. Maybe wrap it into the Irrational Optimism movement, if that is something that you're trying to integrate as well. Just let the people know what you're working on, what you're excited about, and where they can find more of you.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, so I just launched my Substack last week. That is something that I have been toying with the idea of for months, but I've been so nervous to put myself and my story out there for a multitude of different reasons. It was really just that like nagging voice of fear in the back of my head at the end of the day. But I finally just said, screw it, I'm going to do it. And if everybody hates it, who cares? At least I tried. So I just put another one out today. I don't have like a regular schedule for when I am posting, because whenever I do creative projects like this, it always comes best whenever I just let it flow. Like when I have the, inspiration to write, I'm going to write, and then I'm going to put it out whenever I feel like putting it out. I do plan on posting on there pretty regularly. Just because I think it is important to tell more pieces of my story, just with the intent of helping people. I tell people a lot that I have been through like 3 or 4 different lifetimes in these 25 years that I've had on this earth. I have been through so much, more than you could even fathom that somebody should go through in this short of a span of time. And there's always somebody out there who needs to hear what you have to say, regardless of what that thing is. So that's something that I'm really excited about. Definitely want to touch on the Irrational Optimism movement, because that's something that is so incredibly important to me. And it started so low key. Like so Jake on Twitter, he is the leader of our movement, and it all started whenever he posted a video of himself putting his shopping cart away at the grocery store, and I was like, yeah, that's my kind of person. I like people who do stuff like that. So we followed each other, we like became like acquaintances, whatever, and then he made his post about irrational optimists, and it was pretty like vague at first. He was just trying to like put a community together of like-minded people who just wanted to be irrationally optimistic and spread more light to the world. And I had that intuitive feeling that I was like, you know what, I should just apply. Like, who cares if I don't get accepted? I should just do it. And so I did. And there was a Google Doc that you had to fill out to get accepted, and I literally just like spilled my guts in this Google Doc. Like, I don't know what came over me, but I was like, I'm just gonna put myself out there and see how it goes. And when I first was added, I was the only girl in the space for a while, with like 150 dudes. So it was a lot, and it's kind of intimidating. And there's still only a handful of girls in there. That's something that we are really trying to push for right now. There's me, Maddie, and then Brother Stretchgo on Twitter. I don't know if any of you know her. But the three of us are really kind of trying to spearhead the like women's side of that movement and make it more a women friendly space, because it's not just like money Twitter dudes who are in there, you know, talking about like their businesses and, you know, whatever else. It's really like a movement, like genuinely, where we just want to spread optimism and light and love to a world that is so dark. And so that's really what we're trying to do with that. There's a lot of cool things that Jake has in the works, that he is, you know, regularly putting out announcements about, and we're just kind of trying to blast all of social media with our content to really get that message out there even more, because even if people see that and they're not necessarily like, oh, like a rational optimist, I want to join this, I want to be a part of it, everything that we post is so uplifting and so motivational, and it really shows that like you can come from the deepest of pits and you can bring yourself out of it. Everybody has that ability, and then everybody in Irrational Optimists that I have made friends with over the course of, I think it's been like only a month and a half now. It feels like so much longer, but they are all seriously so fantastic, top-notch people, like people that I am so grateful to know and just have as part of my life now. So that's just a really beautiful thing. And as more happens with that, we'll definitely be sharing more about like the direction that we're going and the things that we're doing.
Yeah, that's super awesome. I think, you know, I put myself in that circle, not even knowing how or why or whether or not I was going to be able to contribute in a meaningful way, but just like surrounding yourself with that positive energy, it really does start to spiral. Like, one, it's a natural attraction just vibrationally, but like on top of that, you can't, it's really hard to lose when you surround yourself by people who are winning and also even interested in it. You know, I think a lot of people in there are on the younger end of the spectrum. You know, it's
Oh, they're
not full of
babies. I
like,
love them, but they're babies.
yeah. It's not full of a lot of like multimillionaires yet. But what's cool is to think that many of those people are and have the potential to be really wildly successful. So like it could be one of the highest net worth groups of individuals that just haven't been paid yet. At least that's
Mhm.
like that's how I like to frame it. You know, I like to talk. I heard something from Jesse Eitzler. He's a very successful entrepreneur, but he said when he was back on his couch, like spitting beats to his friends freestyle, like he's like, yo, we're all millionaires. They just haven't paid us yet. And like he ended up being a multimillionaire, super successful business guy. And I love that mindset,
Mhm.
both in like kind of the spiritual, like law of attraction way, but also just like a positive outlook, right? Like imagine yourself to be someone great, like choose an aspirational version of yourself to aspire towards and write a beautiful story with your life. What other option do you have? Like you can certainly choose a darker path. You can use the words the world is kind of pushing towards us, and that is not an optimistic view a lot of the times, unfortunately. So I like the positivity behind the message, and I like that you're a part of it. I think you're a super fascinating person. I appreciate you taking the time. I want to end this by asking, I have three questions that I ask every single guest. And I know we didn't really get to touch in. I think this begets a part two potentially, but we didn't get to dive into like masculinity and femininity, attraction, relationships, like even where you are at with all that stuff, like being a young mother. A lot of questions I want to ask, but I do want to kind of curtail this conversation. So I will ask you a question that is wildly out of context for this conversation, but in your eyes, what defines being a man?
Ooh, I feel like, I probably have a very unique perspective on that as a woman. So whenever I think of what really defines a man, honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is my dad. And I'm so grateful that he is a person that I can think of whenever I conceptualize things like that. But he's a very hard worker. He's very disciplined. He's very adamant about taking care of himself and other people and his family. He's very much a family man. Something that he's really big on too, and I think this is massive for men, and everybody in general, actually. But an extra big thing for men is to be true to your word. That's something that he has drilled in my brain forever. If you say something, if you say you're going to do it, because as soon as you don't, people lose respect for you. They lose trust with you. And that's just not a good path to go down. Let me think. I think those are kind of like the general points of what cover it. And even men who aren't, like they're not they don't have their own family yet, or like they haven't found a wife and had kids or whatever. Just being somebody who other people can rely on, and that doesn't mean to neglect yourself so that you can take care of everybody else's problems. But if you have people that are close to you, that they love you, you love them, they're very important to you, and they call you, and whether they just want to talk for a little bit, they need some advice, they need help moving some furniture, with like something even bigger than that, showing up for those people, I think, is a very, very important masculine trait. So I think that's my answer for that.
I love that answer. And I smiled like very widely when you said true to your word, because I just had Peyton Elroy on the podcast. And she was the first female guest of the podcast, not by any particular rule set. It is like my brand is specifically around men's self-development. It's who I work with. So it's been predominantly male, whether it's my solo episodes or the guys that I've worked with. But I think bringing the female perspective is important. And it is something that is universally said, like men, women alike have all shared. And that was her answer. Someone who's true to their word, does what they say they're going to do, is so kind of unanimous. And I love that you also touched on responsibility there at the end too, like being responsible for not only yourself, but the people around you, and assuming that accountability. So I like that answer a lot. And it's definitely very aligned with my perception as well. And I think what I love about asking that question is we're taking something that a lot of people would purport to be aqueous and non-definable. But if I can use my podcast and eventually get to episode 500 and say, of 500 people, 485 have said the same thing, like there is something that clearly defines it. So part of my mission, I suppose. But the second question is, if you could go back to a younger version of yourself and tell her one thing, what would that thing be?
Ooh, I was actually just having thoughts about this the other day. I read a tweet and it was like, if you could meet a younger version of yourself and only say one word, what would you say? And of course, I couldn't think of just one word because there are so many things. But I think what I would tell a younger version of myself, I think the most important thing would be to trust in myself, because that's something that evaded me for a long time, is that trust in just who I am and what I'm doing. And I think had I found that earlier, things would have been a lot different. I don't wish they were different, because I wouldn't be who I am today if my life had not gone the way it did, but I think that would have been helpful for me.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And then finally, what is one quote that is always stuck with you or that you try to live by?
Okay. This is actually, can I have two?
I suppose I will allow it, but there's gonna have to be some good explanation there.
Okay. Funny enough, these are both actually on my Twitter. One is in my bio and one is in my header. So the first one that I think is most important to me is, I intend to burn this disgrace of a planet with all the love and good I can muster. I think that really encapsulates me and my energy and my mission and what I'm trying to do. And then the other one, this is Latin, and I'm not even going to try to say the Latin phrase because I'm going to butcher it, because I won't be able to do it. But the translation of it is through difficulties to greatness, which I think ties into the first one, is just taking all of the bad negative things that have happened to you, and just bettering yourself off of those things and bringing love and good to the world.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think the concept of alchemy, I think when I think of like what is self-mastery, what is a master of the world, it's someone who is an alchemist, someone who can take whatever ingredient, hate, darkness, tragedy, loss, and alchemize it to be growth minded. Like you were presented with what many people would characterize as a challenge. Like a teen pregnancy, you know, you have your whole life ahead of you, all these things, right? Like, and I'm sure there were dark times, there were scary times, but the fact that you can now sit as an established young woman and be so confident, but also be sharing a positive message. I mean, like, it's so powerful. Like, think if you had someone to look on a podcast and listen to when you were that girl and be like, oh my God, she did it. Like, she's an amazing mother, still accomplishing things with her whole life ahead of her. She's setting a role model for her son and all the little irrational optimist sons that are in the Discord server, like all of it, right? Like, I don't know. I think it's a beautiful story. So thank you so much for sharing it with me and whatever our captive audience that's soldiered on to close to 2 hours here with us. But it's been really excellent. And I look forward to following up both for my private readings as well as our part 2, if you are, of course, open and available for it. But I appreciate your time. Let the people know where they can find you before we hop off.
Yes. I just want to say thank you so much for having me. This was really fantastic. I was so nervous to do this because I have never done anything like this before, but I agree. It's been a very excellent conversation. So my most consistent online stomping ground is Twitter. I am at Alexandria Leora. That's the easiest place to find me, to reach me. My Substack is linked on there as well, alexandrialeora.substack.com. Same on Instagram, but the O in Leora is a 0. So any of those places, I'm very available. My DMs are open. I'm always open to, you know, talking to new people, making new friends, and diving into any of these topics that we've talked about, and so much more.
Yeah, that's awesome. I will make sure to have all of your contacts linked in the show notes for those that are curious and interested in catching up with you. I can't imagine making it this far and not wanting to at least offer thanks, but certainly pick your brain. And then for those listening, also, if you want to continue to follow along with the work that I'm doing on Instagram, it's at Vitruvian Gentleman. On Twitter at ZDSCHENKEN. Obviously, you are listening to this on either Spotify, Apple, or the YouTube channel, for which I appreciate. Call to action, subscribe. I don't do that enough, but throw a little subscribe on the YouTube. Hoping to diversify content there in the near future. But thank you for spending your time and attention with me today. They're your most valuable resources. Memento Mori, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Vitruvian Man podcast.
And if he fails, at least fails while daring greater, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat.